Hello, welcome. Just in time. We're about to get started. So, what's up, folks? Happy Thursday, happy Friday, Junior, as many of you like to put it. I was just saying, us as realtors, our Fridays, when Friday comes around, we got to start viewing it as our Mondays, right? Because that's when we get stuff done. That's when our buyers, our clients become available for showings. A lot of people work 9 to 5s. Don't underestimate that. So come Fridays, it's our Monday, and let's treat it as such. Can everyone hear me okay really quickly before I start? I want to make sure. Give me the heads up. Y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect, perfect. So very important topic, right? It should be a brief training this week, but nonetheless, let's treat it with the weight that it deserves because we're going to be talking about once you're under contract, what are the deadlines that you need to meet? Now we're mostly gonna focus on the buyer's agent, right? But I'm gonna drop a few nuggets, for whenever we're on the listing side, we also want to be very conscientious of these deadlines, so that we can pull strings, we can pull levers and have things work in our favor. So the reason why this training is so important is because if we don't treat these deadlines with the respect that they deserve, then this is how deposits get lost, right? You don't ever want to find yourself in a situation where you lose your buyer or seller's deposit, right? It's not a fun situation to be in. It's not one that you ever want to be in, right? So the way we mitigate that, the way we completely avoid that is by treating the deadlines, the contract deadlines, with the utmost respect, right? So really quickly, before we start, my advice, folks, is take a weekend, take a day, take a few hours. What I want y'all to do, a little bit of homework, but this is homework with reason, right? You take the as is contract. You also take down the line, you want to read the listing agreements, all the contracts, right? But let's start with the as is contract for sale and purchase. And I need y'all to read it through and through. Grab a highlighter, and you need to mark down anything of interest, anything important, and anything that you may have questions on, right? Because the more you know the contracts that you're submitting, the better equipped you're going to be when you're under contract and meeting these deadlines. So it's homework, but very, very important homework, right? We as professionals in this industry, we need to know what's in the contract that we're submitting on behalf of our clients, right? And sometimes the determining factor on who wins in negotiations or who wins when getting the deal done is going to be how well you know the contract and how well you know the contract deadlines. And what we need to do is when we're under contract, it's celebration, but keep in mind, folks, the job's not done. The job's not done. In my book, you sold the house, right? If you get under contract, you did your part, you already sold that property, right? Now, this is when you step in as a realtor, this is when the real work begins. Now you need to guide it to closing. So, as professionals, we need to make sure we have a flow, a strategy, an attack plan, a way of having a process to keep up with these deadlines because deadlines are important. And by not respecting these deadlines, this is how we lose our clients' deposit. So I like to start with a quote. Usually, I found this online, very, very interesting, and it's very relevant to our conversation. Can somebody read this very, very quick quote? I need a volunteer, please. Who's gonna do it? Do I gotta pick somebody? Enyo, you there?
Yeah.
Can you read this for me, brother?
Can you hear me?
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah. Everybody knows the power of deadlines, and we all hate them, but their effectiveness is undeniable.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Any thoughts after reading this quote that come to mind? Pretty
You got
simple,
it.
right? Look, guys, at the end of the day,
You're free to.
deadlines. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, you were breaking up. That's why. That's all I was saying.
Is that better? Is that better?
Yeah.
Folks, deadlines mean pressure. I understand that, right? As it says right here, very, very simple but efficient quote. Everybody knows the power of deadlines, but we all hate them. But again, their effectiveness is undeniable. Deadlines are important, guys. Yes, they mean pressure. They mean something needs to get done at a certain amount of time. But if it weren't for them, we'd take forever to close these deals. And yes, we need to view deadlines as obviously it's pressure, right? Especially if you're the buyer's agent, it's pressure on your part to deliver things in a timely manner. But at the end of the day, folks, this is what we're here for, right? And there are ways of using these deadlines as leverage. You need to harness the power of these deadlines. And yes, deadlines mean pressure, but if you have a flow, if you have a process for how to keep track of these deadlines, you're going to start looking at it less as pressure. There's always going to be some pressure because that's the nature of a deadline, but you're going to start looking at them not only as opportunities, but you're going to start having a system where you can deliver everything just in time. If better is earlier than these deadlines so that you can sleep at night, so that you can have peace of mind that you're doing everything possible for your clients. And that's what we're here for, folks. We do this on the daily, even for those of us that do this part-time. This is what we know, this is what we do, and we are exposed to real estate. We're exposed to contracts more than the average person. If it weren't for you, the representation, they'd be lost out there. They'd be getting taken advantage of by listing agents. So don't undermine the value that you bring and harness the power of deadlines, right? Know the contract, read the contract through and through. And we're also going to talk about how to have a system in place to keep track of these deadlines. Because again, I'll say it again, we need to respect these deadlines. This is how deposits get lost, right? We have a very important job and we're here to be on the front lines for our clients. So firstly, you want to always ask for the seller property disclosure. Now, full disclosure, there is no timeline for when you ask for that seller property disclosure. You could even ask for it the day before closing. Obviously, do not do that. Make it a part of your process to always seller property disclosure. And very importantly, always review this document, right? We are here to be the front lines. We're here to catch things before they get that snowball effect, right? So if you see a seller property disclosure that mentions anything about any defects, any past leaks, or maybe any sort of polybutylene piping, for example, you want to catch
Hmm.
these things ahead of time, right? Because you don't just want to ask for the seller property disclosure and just forward it to your client, to your buyer. We're here to review things. We're here to always give our input. If all you're doing is requesting a seller property disclosure and forwarding it straight to the client without reviewing it, then you're just a messenger. And remember, we're not here to be messengers. We're here to give our clients the highest chance of winning, right? So step number one, always request the seller property disclosure and always review it, most importantly, right? So just a quick tip there. No deadline, but always get ahead of it. As soon as you're under contract, ask for that SPD, seller property disclosure. So you got you're on the buying side, right? You send an offer to the seller, you get the offer back. You are now officially executed on that contract. So I want us to keep something in mind, folks. The effective date on a contract is not when it is signed. It is when that contract is signed and then delivered. Only then will you be under contract, right? So never go off of when the offer was signed, because when you read your contracts, you'll see clearly that it states once the contract is signed and delivered to the other party, that is your effective date, right? So let's not make that mistake if I see it all the time, we go off of when the contract was signed. But if it was delivered the very next day and you're still within your acceptance date, which means your offer has not expired, you're not going to go off of when it was signed. You're going to go off of when it was delivered, right? Very important to know when you're on the buying side, but even on the listing side as a selling agent. So the effective date is when the executed contract gets delivered to the other party, right? And very important too is the countenance of time. When you read your contracts, folks, again, don't forget that homework. It's going to take some time, but the value that you're going to get from reading over that contract is immeasurable. I mean it. On the actual contract, there's gonna be a section that reads just like that: countenance of time. In other words, in simpler terms, it brings selling side and buying side on the same page on how that time is going to be calculated, right? So the day of the contract execution and delivery, because again, it's not just when it gets executed, when that contract gets completely signed, it's when it gets delivered, right? So that day, you're going to always count it as day number 0, right? It doesn't matter if it's 11:30 at night. If that contract got executed, in other words, completely signed, if it gets executed and delivered at 11:30 at night, you're going to count that day as day number 0. Make sense? Because what you're going to do is the day of contract execution and delivery, you'll count as day 0. Every day after that, you're going to count, right? So let's say you get a signed contract 11 at night. That's going to be on a Sunday night, right? Sunday's day number 0, followed by Monday, day number 1, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're going to count. It doesn't matter if it's, and again, we're talking about the as is contract, right? Because the crisp contract has a different set of rules on the countenance of time, but we're going to focus on as is. It's what we usually use. You're going to count each day as its own day. So we start with day number 0, day of contract execution and delivery, followed by day number 1, day number 2. It doesn't matter if it's a Saturday, a Sunday, or a holiday. You're going to count those days, right? Now, here's the other thing. Countenance of time. It states clearly on the contract. Other than time of acceptance and the effective date of the contract, any day that lands on a Saturday, a Sunday, or national legal holiday shall extend to the next day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, or national legal holiday. So if I get a contract on Friday, then we have the weekend. Let's say we have Monday is Memorial Day, federal holiday. So on Friday, we have day number 0. We're going to count Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, even though it's a national legal holiday. So we'll start with Friday, day 0, Saturday's day 1, Sunday's day 2, Monday's day 3. Now, let's say we have a deadline that ends on Monday and it's Memorial Day, right? Now, we're still going to count Monday, but that deadline will extend to the following day. So in this case, it'll extend to Tuesday. So instead of that deadline being Monday, Memorial Day, it's going to be carried over to Tuesday, because Tuesday is the next day that's not a Saturday, a Sunday, or a national legal holiday. Same thing, folks. If you have an inspection, again, this is the as-is contract, where the inspection period ends on a Saturday or a Sunday, that's going to move over to Monday, as long as Monday is not a national legal holiday. So for some of us, we already know this. Some of us probably do not, but the countenance of time, the way you count time, is dictated in the contract. And you're going to want to know how that works. You don't want to find yourself miscounting a day and trying to get out of a deal, let's say out of a deal during your inspection, just to come to find the inspection actually ended yesterday, right? Don't find yourselves in that position. Learn how we count time according to the as is contract. do yourselves a favor. So, folks, deadlines. I know it means pressure, right? Deadlines naturally induce a sense of pressure, but that is the idea, right? We want to have power over deadlines so that we can use these deadlines if needed to add pressure to the listing agent, if needed to add pressure to our buyers, right? You need to run these deadlines. Do not let these deadlines run you, right? Harness the power of the deadline and always have a system in place for these deadlines, right? So when you go under contract, I know some of us have TCs, right? Where they're gonna handle the deadlines for us in the sense of they're gonna write inspection period ends on this day, loan approval ends on that day, and that is very important, right? I have a TC myself that handles that. But as the head of my business, right? The buck is always going to stop with you, the realtor. If there's any issues with the way that deadline gets counted, they're not going to blame your TC. They're going to blame the head honcho. They're going to blame you, right? Because the buck always stops with you, folks. So even though my TC handles the deadline dates and counting of the deadlines, go into that email that they send and count the deadlines yourselves, guys. Like, make sure that you are that support, that safety net, right? Count the deadlines yourself and just cross check what your TC says. And then, secondly, have a process in place for how you're going to keep track of these deadlines, right? We all have different ways of operating, everyone is different. Personally, I'll put these deadlines on my iPhone as reminders, right? I want to get a reminder the day of, maybe sometimes the day before, even. And then I also like to set Outlook calendar invites. Well, I use Outlook. If you use Gmail, use the Gmail calendar. But the point is, set a calendar invite for yourself as well. That way you have two systems of keeping up with these deadlines. Because, folks, again, you don't want to find yourselves the day after the deadline where you should have done something, and because you didn't have a process in place, you missed the deadline. Again, folks, you put your buyer's deposit at risk when you do this. So, of course, deadlines mean pressure. It is the nature of a deadline, but be sure you treat these deadlines with the respect, with the weight that they deserve, right? We don't want our buyers to lose their deposits. Sometimes it's 5,000, sometimes it's 10,000. Even if it's $100, it hurts, right? Now, we never put deposits for $100. It's usually $1,000 and up. So again, treat it as if it's your money, because even though it's not your money, it's your reputation on the line. So step number one, very, very first deadline, right? So this is not technically a deadline, this very first part. I'm going to talk about condo docs, right? So the condo docs deadline is only in place for condo properties. So when you send an offer for a condo, you need to add what's called the condominium addendum, right? And in that addendum, it clearly states, folks, that the buyer is to request condo documents. Now, there's no actual deadline for when that request is to be made. But once the buyer receives, keyword receives, that condo document, that buyer now has up to 3 days to review those condo documents and, if needed, back out of the deal. So when you're on the buying side, a good habit to establish is when you notice that you're under contract for a condo, always request condo documents up front. And what I would do is I would request it in writing. So send it through email. Hey, Mr. Seller side, this is my request for the condo documents. Send it as soon as possible. Now, if you're the listing agent, again, this only applies to condos, right? If you're the listing agent for a condo, you absolutely need to keep this condo docs portion of the contract in mind, right? Because if you're on the listing side, your seller accepts an offer and you don't send condo documents, you're putting your own deal in jeopardy. How so? You could find yourself in this situation if you're the listing agent and you never sent the condo docs that you needed to send. It don't matter if you're past the financing period. Now, even if you're past the financing period, Helen, you there?
I'm here.
Okay, okay. I think there's a bit of an echo. Just a heads up, famo. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, thank you. So guys, if you're on the listing agent side, right? And you never sent the buying side the condo documents, it don't matter if you're past the financing loan approval period. Because you, as a listing agent, never sent them the condo documents, which is contractual. When you do send those documents, now the buyer has 3 days to not only review those documents, but they have 3 days to back out of the deal. It don't matter if the buyer's past their loan approval period. Do not learn this the hard way. If you're a listing agent for a condo doc, not for a condo doc, for a condo property, make it the very first thing you do. You send all the required condo documents. Don't give your buyer an out once the deal is supposed to close. You don't want to lose that deal the hard way. In that same light, if you're on the buying agent side, request a condo docs right up front, so that you can review those documents before even engaging, right? So that your buyer knows what they're getting into while they're still in their inspection period. So again, the condo docs, part of the contract, there's no actual deadline. Very important for the buying agent, but if you're the listing agent for a condominium, this is super important for you. Send the condo documents as soon as you get under contract. Very important. Don't lose a deal because you did not know this. So the very first deadline technically is going to be the EMD, earnest money deposit. Now this is usually due on day 3 of the contract effective date. So you count day number 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever day that lands on. As long as it ain't a Saturday, Sunday, or national legal holiday, that's the day that you need to have that earnest money deposit sent to the title company. So that is usually our very first deadline, something we need to be very mindful of. Now, folks, I know a lot of people that will not send an EMD, right? But they'll try to get out of the deal before the EMD even gets sent. Do not find yourself doing that. So always send. So if you want to get out of a deal, you need to always send a release and cancellation. Because I know a lot of agents that they'll just not send an EMD, right? And they'll just cancel the contract after the 3 days of having to submit that EMD. Because the logic is they think, oh, I don't have an EMD with title, so they have no leverage over me. No. If you need to get out of the deal, even if you haven't sent an EMD, you need to send that written notice that you're getting out of the deal. Send the release and cancellation. Because even if there is no EMD with title, you're still in the breach of contract. And now the seller, if they wanted to, they could go after that deposit that was never given to title. If you do this, stop doing this immediately. Do yourselves a favor, work correctly, right? Send the release and cancellation. If your buyer's looking to maybe cancel after the 3 days, you send your EMD anyways to title and then you cancel the day after. Do not just think that because you didn't send an EMD, the seller cannot come after you. You are now technically in a breach of contract. So very first deadline is the EMD. Put it on your calendars, put it on your phones, because it's a very, very important deadline. I'm gonna go to deadline number 2. It's actually 2 and 1, right? They're two separate ones, but they tend to be deadlines for day number 5. That is the default on the contract. Now you're gonna see just like the EMD deadline, right? It's usually due day number 3, but it's a blank space. You put whatever date you want to. The default for the EMD is day number 3. The default for the financing and HOA application is day number 5. If you're a listing agent, don't assume it's always going to be day number 5. Look out for what the buying side fills in that blank, right? Because I've seen a lot of people when I'm on the listing agent side, a lot of buyers will not put the 3-day default deadline for the EMD. They'll put like 7 days, right? Because they don't want to give a deposit until they do their inspection. And that's when you as a listing agent can step in and you say, hey, look, we need to see 3 days, the default for that, right? I'm not going to give you 7 days to give the EMD. We're going to stick to the standard 3, negotiate from a position of leverage, because the seller needs to make sure that you're actually serious about buying this home. So don't get caught in that trap. I see a lot of people, and a lot of times they tend to be wholesalers, very iffy on giving their earnest money deposit. They'll put, oh, instead of 3, I'll put in 7. And if you're not a listing agent that's reading that contract, they'll just let it slide. Do not let that slide. That might be a wholesaler. It might be somebody that's not very serious about getting under contract with you. So financing an HOA application, the default is it's usually due on day number 5. And what it states is that the buyer needs to apply for financing on the 5th day or before that 5th day. Now, usually when we get under contract, we have a buyer that's pre-approved. So technically that buyer financing application gets completed, right? So you don't need to worry about it. But it's good to know if you're ever in a situation, it's obviously very rare where you get an offer accepted for your buyer and they haven't even gotten pre-approved or made an application for financing. Just know that this deadline does apply to you. You have until the 5th day from contract effective date for your buyer to make an application for financing. It's very rare, but if you do find yourself in that situation, know that you have a deadline. And the next deadline is going to be the HOA application. The default is also 5, and you'll usually find this on either the HOA disclosure or the condo disclosure if this is a condo that we're talking about. So basically, the buyer has until day number 5 of being under contract to apply to the HOA, right? So this is a very important deadline, right? Because if you ever find yourself in a situation where the buyer did not apply to the HOA in time, then if that deal does not close, you might find a seller who's very pissed off, who's going to start asking questions, right? If you get out of a deal, even if it's within your loan approval period, sellers get pissed off at times, folks, and it is what it is, right? So what they'll do is a lot of times they'll start digging. They'll reach out to the HOA and say, hey, when did this buyer apply to the HOA? They'll start digging and try to catch you slacking. Do not find yourself in that predicament, right? If the property has an HOA and you have on the contract that you have until day number 5 to apply to the HOA, then that's what you're going to have to do, right? Because you don't want to find yourself not having closed that deal and having the seller asking questions, right? Because if they do determine that your buyer applied to the HOA on day number 6 and contractually you had 5 days to apply to the HOA, you are now in a breach of contract. Don't find yourselves in that position. So there's a quick tip here. Give your buyer the leeway to contractually apply to the HOA after the inspection period is over. What that means is, yes, I understand the default is usually 5, but again, you write in the number of days that you want to give your buyer, right? So let's say you have a 7-day inspection period. What you could do is you can have your 7 days of inspection, but in the portion that asks you how many days, by what day do you want your buyer to apply for HOA, doesn't hurt to mark off day number 8 right? Because it doesn't have to be 5. The default is 5, but you can make it whatever you want it to be. Now you don't want to eat into too many days because you need to give the HOA the opportunity to approve your client just in time for closing, right? But the logic behind influencing the number of days your buyer has for the HOA financing is you want to give your buyer the opportunity to go through their inspection period. Give them a chance to see if there's anything seriously wrong with the property, right? Because you don't want to have your buyer on day number 3 send in HOA documents and make these payments for application for the HOA. Sometimes it costs up to $300. You don't want them to make these payments just to hear after the fact that there's a major issue with the property and now you got to back out of the deal. That is $300 that you could have saved your client if you worked smartly, right? So first, make sure there's nothing seriously wrong with the property. Then feel comfortable enough to tell your buyer, this is our time now to make these payments to the HOA. Because HOAs, this is how they make their money. They ain't giving refunds. I mean it. They capitalize on these opportunities and they don't reimburse once you pay them, right? So a good way to go about it is if you have an inspection period of 5 days, on your HOA application section of your HOA disclosure, put 6 days, right? So that your buyer has until the very next day to apply to the HOA and they're not in a breach of contract. Inspection deadline, important deadline, right? This is it usually lasts between 5 to 10 days. Now I hardly ever see 10 days anymore. You want to put a max of 7 days to make it a very aggressive offer. Maybe you'll put 10 or 15 days if you're doing a cash offer. But otherwise, folks, I want to see between 5 and 7 days. You don't need 10 days to look at a property inspection and make the determination. I want to see 5 to 7 days. And the inspection is one of the biggest opportunities that we have for negotiation. We went over negotiation not too long ago. Seize on that opportunity, capitalize, maximize the opportunity to negotiate for your buyers because we have several outs, if you will, during the transaction. You have your appraisal contingency, you have your loan approval contingency, right? That's your final out, the loan approval. But the inspection contingency, the inspection deadline, it's really the deadline where your buyer has the most freedom to walk away. They could walk away just because they changed their minds, right? So treat the inspection deadline with the utmost respect and capitalize on that opportunity to negotiate for your client. Appraisal. We have also, believe it or not, appraisal deadlines, right? So the default is 10 days. And what the contract states is appraisal must be delivered to buyer, delivered, keyword delivered to the buyer at least 10 days prior to closing, right? So in case some of you didn't know, this is another deadline that we as professionals need to keep track of. Our buyer needs to have been delivered a copy of the appraisal at least 10 days prior to closing. Very important deadline. If obviously if the appraisal comes in short, do not count your losses just yet. Again, these are opportunities to negotiate price, right? Tell the seller that, appraisal came in at a certain amount and they're going to run into this issue with any financed offers they go with. So let's tackle this now and reach a solution, right? Sometimes these obstacles are opportunities that we can use to look out for our clients to get credits, to get repairs. Now, quick tip. If the appraisal comes in higher, if I'm the buyer's agent and my appraisal comes in higher, first of all, I'm gonna congratulate my buyer and let them know that they're walking in with equity before even moving into the house. It's very good news, right? If the appraisal comes in higher. Now, do not tell the seller side, do not tell the listing agent that that appraisal came in higher. You know, just tell them it came in okay, right? Because the seller, they're gonna start getting ideas, right? They're gonna start thinking, dang, the appraisal is, if the market value is more than what I went under contract for, they may start having second thoughts and they may start wanting to get out of the deal. Why would you share that information that is of no benefit to yourself or to the buyer? The appraisal came in higher and I'm the buyer's agent. You tell the selling agent it came in okay, came in just fine. Nope, it came at value. That's what you tell them, right? Do not give them information that is of no benefit to you and might place some risk on the deal, right? So do yourselves a favor. Don't give out too much info. A good rule of life is don't say more than you have to, right? So something to keep in mind. That's a quick tip. I never tell them it came in higher. I tell them it came in just fine. Important deadline. And basically your last chance usually to get out of the deal is the loan approval period. As it says on the top right here, this is your final out. So very important. A lot of times we'll put 21 days, 25 days, sometimes 30 days for a loan approval period. Now I've mentioned this before. I need to reiterate, guys. The way I like to operate is when I get a conditional approval for my buyers, when they get conditional approval, even if it's on day, let's say it's on day 7. Let's say I have a loan approval period of 21 days, and on day 7, I get conditional approval. I'm not going to tell the seller side that I have that approval, because the moment you tell them that you have conditional approval in writing, that loan approval period gets erased. So you no longer have 21 days to get out of the deal because you sent in writing that you have approval. Do not make that mistake. You want to be in control of that information. If I have a 21-day loan approval period, I don't care if I get the loan approval on day 3. I'm going to control that information so that come day 21, I'm going to send written notice to the seller side and tell them, hey, friendly heads up, we have conditional approval for this loan. Take this as written notice. We have conditional loan approval for the loan. If you don't provide that written notice, right? So if the loan approval period comes and goes, right? Even if you got loan approval, conditional approval on day number 3, because you never gave written notice to the seller side, now the seller contractually has 3 days after that loan approval deadline to get out of the deal, right? So don't find yourselves in a position where you told the seller, hey, the appraisal came in even higher than what we're under contract for. That's the first no-no, right? And then after that, on your loan approval period, your loan approval deadline comes and goes. So not only does the seller know that they're under contract for less than market value, now if they have a listing agent that knows their contract and they want to get out of the deal, you're now giving them the ammunition to get out of the deal. Not only are you under contract for less than market value, because you didn't send written notice to the seller side that your buyers approved, they now have 3 whole days to get out of the deal, right? Do not learn this the hard way. This is a very important tip, right? When you get loan approval, control the information. I would not just give it to the seller side immediately. I like to wait to the very last day of the deadline of the loan approval for me to send by email, friendly heads up, we have conditional approval. Please confirm receipt of this email. Make sense? This one's super, super, super important. I know I've talked about it before, but I promise you this is not something you want to learn the hard way. Do not learn it the hard way. Technically, your closing date, that is a deadline, right? Treat it with the weight it deserves. You know, by that date, you need to have closed on the property, right? So always respect the closing date. What I like to put on my contract is when you're sending a contract as a buyer's agent, give your buyer options to close sooner. The way you do that is instead of just flat putting a day of closing, put on or before. I promise to close on or before November 16th, right? Instead of just a hard November 16th, use the on or before method, right? Give all parties a chance to close sooner if they want to, right? Just a quick tip. I know a lot of us do that, but for those of us that don't know, it doesn't hurt to have options, right? So put on or before and give all parties the opportunity to close beforehand if everyone's on the same page, said they want to close beforehand. And save yourself having to write an addendum to contract changing the closing date, right? So quick tip, a very important tip. So another tip, if the buyers have not received HOA approval within 5 days of the closing date, the buyer has an option to back out of the deal. So if you're the buyer's agent, I mean, you don't really want to exercise this much, but you will have to exercise it if you have to, right? Because the contract clearly states it's in the HOA disclosure and the condominium disclosure. If the buyer has not been approved with the HOA within 5 days of the closing date, your buyer can back out of the deal. So like I told you, the loan approval period is usually the buyer's final out, their final chance to get out of the deal. Now, the reason I said usually is for a scenario like this. If you're past your loan approval period and within 5 days of closing date, your buyer does not have the approval from the HOA, they now have the option to exercise backing out of the deal. It's just something that you want to keep in mind, right? It's not the end. If buyer really, really, really has to get out of the deal, I mean, you always try to make the deal work, folks. But if your buyer has to get out of the deal, it's looking like they're not going to get HOA approval in time and they're past their loan approval period, just know they can back out of the deal if it's 5 days before closing. And on the other hand, by the way, if you're the listing agent, you also need to keep in mind that if the buyer does not get their HOA approval in time, they now have 5 days. Within 5 days, they can back out of that deal. So you as a listing agent want to be very, very on top of the buyer's agent and how it's going with HOA approval. Pester them, spam them a little bit, let them know, hey, how are we looking on HOA, right? Reach out to the HOA and make sure that the buyer gets the approval for more than 5 days before closing. Because if it's 5 days within closing, buyer does not have an HOA approval, just know that buyer can get out of the deal contractually, right? On another note, while we're talking about HOA, this is where it becomes super, super, super important to be conscientious of the HOA application deadline, where the default is usually 5. Again, you can play with that number so that your buyer has until after inspection period to apply to the HOA. Let's say we're 5 days before closing, right? Your buyer has not gotten HOA approval. Your buyer decides to get out of the deal. You might have a very pissed off seller who's going to start asking questions because, granted, contractually, you can get out of the deal because you haven't gotten HOA approval. But now the seller is going to wonder, the seller or the listing agent, most likely, right? They're going to wonder, they haven't gotten their HOA approval. So my question is, when did they apply to the HOA, right? So they're going to go back, they're going to ask the HOA, when did this buyer make an application? Because if you have contractually that your buyer has until day 5 to apply to the HOA, and now the seller finds out straight from the HOA that they applied on day number 6, be careful. Be careful. Because yes, your buyer has an option to back out of the deal because they didn't get the HOA approval in time, but now your seller has evidence that your buyer is in a breach of contract. And now that deposit is at risk, right? So another friendly note, be very conscientious of that HOA application deadline that we talked about previously. You don't want to find yourself with an angry seller that's going to look at the whole transaction, start digging deep, and you don't want them to find that you were actually in a breach of contract. You don't want them to find out that the reason you haven't gotten HOA approval within 5 days of closing is because your buyer applied on day number 10, when contractually they're supposed to apply to the HOA within 5 days if you keep the contract in its default 5 day timeline, right? So very important stuff, guys. Very important. Last but not least, obviously, always schedule a walkthrough. It is not only your last opportunity to negotiate, right? You know, I told a story about my last deal where the seller did not repair something they had to repair. So on the spot, I asked for $1,000 credit. You know, you do the silent close always, right? Use silence to your advantage, like we've talked about, and we were able to get the buyer an extra $1,000 at credit in the walkthrough, right? So it's a very good opportunity to leverage, to maximize in negotiations if you find something wrong the day of walkthrough, right? Also, you want to make sure that the property is in the same condition that you guys saw it in when you first showed the property. That property needs to be in the same condition, and it's your last chance to make sure that if the washer and dryer is more important, I should say, if the washer and dryer is included in the purchase contract, this is your chance to make sure that there's a washer and dryer on the property. Do not skip out on the final walkthrough. Again, this is your last opportunity. This is when you have leverage. If you don't perform your walkthrough, and then after closing date, you find out that the washer and dryer are not in the property, you can't go after the seller. The closing's been done. What leverage are you gonna have? The leverage you have during the walkthrough is that your buyers have not signed yet. And because they have not signed yet, this is when you apply pressure. Yo, Mr. Seller, where's my washer and dryer, right? We made it a part of the contract, and we're here at our walkthrough, and I don't see it. We ain't signing till we get that washer dryer. That's when you have leverage. If you don't do your walkthrough and you find out after the fact, not only do you have zero leverage to get that washer dryer, you look very incompetent to your buyers. You know, some of us have had to learn this the hard way. So always schedule your walkthrough. The reason why I included this in our deadlines training is because there is a walkthrough deadline, believe it or not, contractually. Contractually, the walkthrough needs to be done either the day prior to closing or the day of closing. I don't know how many of us knew this, but some of us like to do the walkthrough 2 days before closing or the week of closing. Contractually, meet the contract. Do the walkthrough either the day before closing or the day of closing. Very important, right? Because it's contractual. It's right there in black and white. Implications, right? This is the final slide, folks. If we don't treat these deadlines, I understand it means pressure, but it's useful pressure. Treat these deadlines with the weight they deserve, because the implication is you put your buyer's deposit at risk, and that is not a conversation that you want to have with buyers, that you dropped the ball or didn't keep track of the important deadlines in order to save their deposit, right? So very important training, because this is people's money that we're dealing with, folks, right? So treat it with the weight it deserves, and be the professionals that I know that you guys are, right? At the end of the day, this our buyers are not in this world the same way that we are. So let's maximize the opportunity that we have with our champions, right? At the end of the day, these are our champions. These are people that, despite all the realtors in South Florida, they decided to work with us, right? You need to treat them like your champions, because they, in fact, are. Out of all the competition, they trusted you with their deal. So These deadlines, treat them with weight, maximize the opportunities, and let's be on the front lines for our clients. It's very important. It's a very important job that we have, but it's also very wholesome at the end of the day. When you can get to closing and you can rest well at night knowing that you did everything possible for your client, it's what we're here for, right? We ain't here for the transaction. We're here for the relationship, right? And when you show a buyer or a seller that you're looking after them with these deadlines and showing them things that they can't possibly know because they don't do real estate in the same way that we do, that is the value that we bring. And most importantly, it's not about the transaction, it's about the relationship, right? When you first meet with a buyer or seller, you tell them, look, let me tell you what I want. I want to do a solid job by you, right? I need to earn it first. Because what I want to do is I want to work with more people like yourself. So when you have close friends, close family that need a realtor, I want to be that guy that comes to mind. But I know that I got to earn it first. Let me get you to the finish line. Let me get you to closing because when your family or friends need somebody, I want to be who you recommend. And you tell them up front that that's what you want. Make it always about the relationship, right? Because every person that you meet knows at least 100 people, and never judge a book by its cover. So that's basically it, guys. That's the presentation. Again, deadlines important. Treat them with respect. Treat them with the weight they deserve. And any questions? Let me know. Any questions? Meanwhile, let me pull up the Zoom chat. Perfect, guys. Enio, thank you, bro. Good to see you.
You too, buddy.
Thank you, Yanelis. Thank you, Helen. Love having you here.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Gladys. Thank you. Thank you.
Great presentation, really helpful.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Thank you.
Thank you,
I'll
thank
see
you. I
you Thursday,
appreciate it.
y'all. Thursday,
Okay.
another one. Another one.
Dale.
Perfect. Bye. Take care.
Dale. Bye, guys. Bye. Happy Thursday. Remember, tomorrow's Friday. So Friday's our Monday. Let's get at it. See y'all on the next one.